Chapter 121, Breaking the Shell. While the townsfolk were debating the meaning of art, Li Wei had already returned to the castle early to pack everything he might need. The usual 3 tools, sword, pickaxe, and axe, plus food and building materials, some valuables, potions, golden apples, and his ultimate fallback, TNT. If Saruman went rogue ahead of schedule, Li Wei wouldn't mind indulging a little mayhem. With everything prepared, he slept well and woke refreshed. That morning, he found something that energized him even more. The lava pool used to incubate the dragon egg was stirring. During his routine inspection of the sealed pool, he heard a crack and noticed a small fissure in the shell. Startled, he stepped closer. The lava's glow shone through the shell, dimly lighting the writhing shape inside. Li Wei felt the impulse to help, but he knew oviparous creatures are better off breaking out on their own. The ability to do so shows the hatchling has the strength to survive outside. So he sat with it and let it try on its own. The process took a whole day. Li Wei stayed by the pool the entire time until at last the shell broke away with a soft clatter. A faint hiss came from the broken shell. A tiny, translucent creature with 2 delicate wings crawled free, spread its wing membranes, and blinked as it opened its eyes to the world for the first time. A dark silhouette loomed over it, offering a little relief from the heat, and a single, unintelligible syllable issued from that figure. "Want some fish?" The hatchling was fragile. It stumbled toward Li Wei's boot and then flopped against it as if seeking comfort. Li Wei picked it up and cupped it in his palm. The little dragon lifted its head, peering up at him with bright, curious eyes. No malice, just wonder and a bit of confusion. Unlike Smaug's fearsome visage, this hatchling was almost translucent, its colors soft and gentle. There was none of the cruelty or greed one expected of the evil dragons forged by Morgoth, those creatures that were supposedly born cunning, avaricious, and hostile to all things good. Perhaps this was a dragon touched by some purifying force. Li Wei produced a grilled fish and held it near the hatchling's mouth. The baby dragon sniffed, then watched Li Wei intently. When Li Wei opened his mouth, it mimicked him. Li Wei took a bite, swallowed, and the hatchling understood. It nibbled the fish, savoring the new pleasure of full belly and warmth of food, an intoxicating experience for any young dragon. Curious, Li Wei set a gold ingot beside it. The hatchling ignored it entirely, preferring the fish. Only after finishing the whole fish and belching did it sniff the gold, lose interest, and glance back at Li Wei. They stared at each other. Li Wei's heart sank a little. Whatever he did, it would copy. Raising a dragon before raising a child, this could be problematic. He decided to turn the problem to his advantage. Li Wei took another gold ingot and pretended to bite it. The little dragon followed suit. After a moment of genuine pained expression on its tiny face, the hatchling developed an aversion to gold. Li Wei then grabbed 2 cabbages, crunched one loudly, and offered the other to the dragon. It sniffed, hesitated, then began munching. The cabbage disappeared within minutes. Well, that confirmed it. The hatchling copied him, and at least it wasn't picky about food. Li Wei spent the rest of the day giving it some basic behavioral lessons. As the moon set and the sun climbed, by noon the next day, he emerged from the obsidian-rimmed hatchery with the juvenile fire dragon tucked in his hand. The hatchling saw sunlight, grass, and people for the first time. Surprised, it spread its tiny wings and let out 2 soft calls. Those calls immediately drew attention. In Roadside Fort, people's eyes always went first to their lord. The rest came second. The nearby residents stepped forward and greeted him in unison. "Good day, lord." One of them then noticed the creature in Li Wei's hand and shouted, "A dragon! An evil dragon!" The cry frightened the hatchling. Its neck retracted and it curled into itself. The people reacted more strongly. They instinctively took a step back. If the dragon hadn't been in their lord's hands, someone might already have reached for a weapon. "No need to panic," Li Wei said calmingly. He stroked the little dragon's head and addressed the onlookers. "This is a fairly benevolent dragon. It's not like the evil dragons of the north. It's pure by nature and lacks those vicious tendencies. It has no interest in treasure and won't eat people. In fact, it prefers grilled fish and cabbage." To prove the point, Li Wei plucked a leaf from the ground and handed it to the hatchling. It obligingly chewed away. "A vegetarian dragon?" The crowd gaped. The dragons described in poems and legends were monstrous, devouring people, burning cities, creating storms with a flap of a wing, images cultivated for generations. Few had actually seen one. Now, seeing a dragon happily munching cabbage at their lord's feet, they were speechless and utterly astonished. Chapter 122, The Meeting. I understand, my lord. A villager, gathering his courage, said, I've long sworn to entrust everything I have to Roadside Fort. I'm willing to risk my life to confirm whether this dragon is safe. May I touch it? Yes, you may. Leeway extended the dragon in his hand. The villager inhaled sharply, reached out, tapped the little dragon gently on the head, then pulled his hand back so fast the hatchling barely had time to register it before the feeling was gone, leaving it looking puzzled. The villager let out a huge sigh of relief and turned to the crowd. Everyone, believe what the Lord says. This dragon is safe. The villagers, startled, all turned their curious eyes toward the tiny fire dragon in Leeway's hands. Many showed eager, almost hopeful faces. Leeway waved them back. All right, disperse. This one just hatched. Don't crowd it, or you'll frighten it. Reluctantly, the villagers stepped back, though their eyes kept drifting toward the hatchery. News like this spread fast. People had time and appetite for gossip, and the idea of a dragon that wasn't wholly evil was simply astonishing. Everyone who could wandered closer to get a look. They were destined to be disappointed. While the villagers pretended to pass by and peered from outside, Li Wei had already taken out materials to make a dragon amulet and tucked the bewildered little fire dragon inside. The amulet was from the Dragon Rider mod. It provided a pocket dimension where a dragon could remain at its master's side at all times. It also had a catch. While inside the amulet, the dragon entered stasis. Its physical growth and development paused. The amulet was useful as an unconventional measure, but if one wanted the dragon to grow normally, it had to be released. Given the circumstances, Li Wei wasn't comfortable letting this hatchling roam free. At least during infancy, it was safer to keep it with him. After confirming the amulet worked, Li Wei let the juvenile out inside the castle for a while to feed and think. It needed a name. Naming was a problem for Li Wei. Sometimes it felt like hitting a wall, but even a wall could be chipped away. He stroked the dragon's tiny head. Its skin was still soft, a reddish pink with no scales yet. Suddenly he clapped his hands. Let's call you Little Pink for now. A temporary nickname until a better one came to mind. In high spirits, Li Wei pulled a strip of jerky from the kitchen and gave it to Little Pink to gnaw on like a teething stick. The hatchling didn't understand the name, only that the jerky smelled far more delicious than roasted fish or cabbage, even if it was a bit tough to bite. 2 days later, satisfied Little Pink was healthy. Li Wei sealed it in the amulet, stepped through the Hell Gate, boarded a boat, and took the frozen route toward River Valley City. He also confirmed the amulet didn't function in the Nether. The amulet went silent the moment they entered, as if the pocket dimension were cut off. Not long after, the Hell Gate in River Valley City twisted, and Li Wei stepped out back into that world. The city was lively. Compared to his last visit, there were many miners carrying pickaxes, clustered in 2s and 3s, heading toward the same place with the ease of people on holiday. When he asked, he learned they were going to work on the quarrying and road paving project. That road will make everything neat and beautiful, my lord, said an old man as Li Wei sat on the steps of a small house beside him. If I weren't so old, I'd join them, the old man added. My lord, actually many of us want to see the road finished more than you do, the old man said. It'll make life better, though life here is already better than we ever imagined. Li Wei nodded, broke a soft biscuit in half, and handed one piece to the old man, who accepted and tasted it with a pleased expression. For a moment, they looked like two ordinary neighbors chatting, a quiet, harmonious scene. Li Wei kept his composure, and they spoke like equals. The old man, who had lived a long life, seemed content. Delicious, my lord. Even my old teeth can feel the goodness in it. This can't be cheap. I don't know if it's cheap, but it's tasty, Li Wei said, pointing to a pastry shop around the corner. The owner gave them to me. The pastry chef meant to pack up all the fresh pastries for me to take away, but I only took 2 biscuits. River Valley City had become, for Li Wei, a sort of buffet. He didn't have to spend money, just show his face, and shopkeepers offered their specialties. The residents were skilled at pastries, constantly experimenting thanks to abundant grain supplies. Many still ran shops for the love of it, trying new recipes. When we were in Long Lake Town, life was poor. We couldn't gather enough grain. Milk and honey were luxuries, the old man said. The last time I tasted something this sweet was years ago. Then eat more now, Li Wei said. There's plenty of grain now, and there will be more. Eat what you like. The old man smiled but shook his head. My teeth aren't so good. I used to have to bite everything, but now I prefer lighter foods. Just then, a pastry chef walked by carrying a basket of bread. Li Wei called to him. The chef stopped, bowed slightly. How much for this bread? I'll take one. The chef brightened immediately. My lord, these are for you. He thrust the basket toward Li Wei, already thinking of the slogan he'd use tomorrow. Bread the Lord loves. Li Wei tried to refuse. No, one is enough. I'm just curious about the taste. My lord, how can one be enough? Take them all. These are my best recent work. Absolutely delicious. Reluctantly accepting the basket the chef practically shoved at him, Li Wei opened his backpack to pay, pulling out a small pouch of silver. Before he could finish, the pastry chef had run off, no doubt returning to his shop in high spirits. Li Wei shook his head, amused, and examined the basket. The bread was a specialty from Long Lake Town, cram, but far more indulgent than the dry travel cram Li Wei had bought from the traveling merchant. These were filled with honey and cream, instantly appetizing. He handed one to the old man, who hesitated but accepted. After one bite, cream oozed out, and the old man couldn't help but nod and take another. This bread is delicious, my lord, he said. Li Wei tried one himself, then put the rest into his pack. As they sat enjoying pastries, another old man came and sat beside them, sighed, adjusted his robe, and propped his walking stick against the wall. Good morning, the newcomer said, greeting Li Wei and the old man. Li Wei took a bite and replied with a tease. Do you mean you hope I have a good morning, or that the morning itself is good no matter what? Or do you feel especially good this morning, or are you simply glad it's morning? The newcomer blinked in surprise, then laughed. All of those, I suppose. Your bread looks good. I haven't eaten yet today. Li Wei broke off half a biscuit and handed it to him. The stranger accepted it and tucked his hands into his sleeves in the old man's customary way, then stared at Li Wei's basket as if waiting for charity. Reluctantly, Li Wei offered another piece. The man ate contentedly. Quite good. The pastries here keep getting better. Because there's plenty of grain now, Li Wei said. If only every place could be this prosperous, the stranger sighed. That day won't be far. After they finished, the stranger spoke up. I've been to Thorin's place. His industries are recovering well, but they still have problems. He asked me to invite you to Erebor if I saw you, or he'll come here to find you. All right, the stranger added. I have time. I'll make the trip. Li Wei stood, bade the old man farewell, and prepared to leave. The stranger rose and fell in behind him. As they reached the corner, the old man propped himself up with his stick, bowed slightly, and waved the black-clad figure off in farewell. Chapter 123, Cooperative Labor. It seems you have won the hearts of the people, Gandalf said with a chuckle. Many times I don't know how I earned such respect either. Li Wei smiled faintly. Maybe it's luck, or something else. If it were someone else, would the outcome be the same? No, Li Wei. Gandalf shook his head decisively, then added, the same thing can have very different effects in different hands. A ring that makes its wearer invisible can become the tool of a great bandit or assassin in the wrong hands, a thing that harms others. In the hands of a hobbit, it might be used to help people, to bring warmth. He paused. Some things can make someone incredibly powerful, powerful enough to exceed what this world can bear. But destroying everything isn't good or fun. Li Wei laughed. All right, you're right. Thanks. Good that you understand. Gandalf lit his pipe and walked with Li Wei out of the city walls toward the Erebor gate set into the great mountain. In Middle-earth, wizards had every right to join in civic affairs, and men in robes were often seen in the king's halls. Today was no different. On hearing Li Wei had arrived, Thorin did not wait in the hall. He came to the doorway himself to greet him. How have you been, Li Wei? Thorin offered a faint smile. Not bad, very smooth. How about things here? Aside from a few material shortages, Everything is fine. Thorin led Li Wei and Gandalf to a small table and poured 3 cups of soothing tea. In this moment, he received them more as a friend than as a king. I heard you were having some trouble here. Li Wei cut to the chase. Is it a problem with minerals? You nearly exhausted Erebor's stores defending the city earlier. No. Thorin shook his head. Minerals are abundant in the mountain. We have the manpower, the tools, and the wealth to acquire more. What troubles us most is food. Food? Li Wei raised an eyebrow. Surely the mountain should be well supplied. Thorin saw the look and explained with some embarrassment. You might not fully realize it, but our food production is very limited. We live inside a great mountain. There's no sunlight. Most of our food has to be imported. There are only a few things we can produce ourselves. Small farms lit by glowgems, a few mushrooms from the tunnels, fish from the dark rivers, some edible roots. They help in emergencies, but they're not enough to feed all the dwarves. River Valley City isn't far, Li Wei said, pointing outward. Their food production is so abundant, they could feed 10 times their population. You won't lack food if you can secure a steady trade. That's precisely what I wanted to discuss. Thorin leaned forward. It's thanks to trade with River Valley City that we got through this last winter. I want a long-term arrangement with them. Of course that's possible. You can go directly to Bard. I've given him authority to manage these affairs. Li Wei expected the king to have settled it. We have talked, Thorin replied, but he said the final decision rests with you. He has full authority. I thought you had already settled it. Never mind. I agree. Li Wei was too tired to argue. He guessed Bard had not yet fully adapted to being the region's highest administrator. Wonderful. Thorin breathed a sigh of relief. We dare not ask for your miraculous seeds outright. As long as we can secure a stable food trade, that's enough. I believe our friendship can last. Why not? Li Wei interrupted with a smile. What's there to be afraid of? They're just crop seeds. If something can make everyone's lives better, why refuse it? If you need them, take them and plant them. But note, those seeds, for anyone other than me, may only be planted within my territory. You can, however, send people to work them together. Thorin's mind buzzed. Such powerful seeds simply given? What was the catch? Then what do we have to do? He asked. Labor, Li Wei said, tapping the table. Even magical seeds must be planted and tended. You don't expect them to sprout on a table unless your table doubles as farmland. Thorin gathered himself. We have tools and craftsmen. We can make what we lack and pay wages if needed. No need, Li Wei waved dismissively. Those material things were trivial to him. He then allowed himself to outline a larger idea. Erebor and River Valley City had been intertwined for centuries. The dwarves were unmatched as smiths and artisans. Their masterworks were priceless. River Valley City had a large population, prosperous agriculture, and well-developed animal husbandry. The dwarves could forge and craft what the humans rarely could. The humans could grow food the dwarves could not. That old pattern of mutual need and mutual benefit had built a robust cooperative model. The humans supplied food, the dwarves supplied workmanship. If that cooperation deepened, both peoples would prosper. Just like before, Li Wei said. Thorin considered the proposal and nodded. Very sensible. We'll regularly send craftsmen to teach skills freely, helping the people of River Valley City find work in exchange for the right to use the magical seeds. Then it's settled. In a few sentences, they reached a broad agreement, without disputes, bargaining, or hard feelings. It was a simple exchange. Labor for labor, value for value. No coin, no complicated contracts. At this point, monetary viz as an intermediary was unnecessary. Both sides cared more about the practical benefits than about accounting the precise cost. Thorin then recalled the old days. When my grandfather regained the throne under the mountain, the people to the south respected him greatly. They moved up along the running river and settled in the valley below the great mountain, building the small, happy River Valley City. Successive kings hired our craftsmen, and even those with humble skills were generously rewarded. Fathers begged us to take their sons as apprentices, often paying with food. As a result, we rarely had to grow our own. They supplied us, and we supplied them with skilled work. For now, that old pattern would be renewed. Seeds and soil for bread, skills and steel for a steady future. Cooperative labor would bind the mountain and the valley together again, each giving what the other most needed. The cooperation is established. After a short conversation, Gandalf, who had been watching quietly, made the formal announcement. Thorin nodded. By the name of the king under the mountain, I swear I will see this partnership through. Neither party shall suffer loss. I'll guarantee it in my own name, Leeway replied. Thorin chuckled. That sounds far stronger than most oaths. With the serious business settled, Thorin exhaled and ordered a lavish banquet. He invited the two to stay. During the meal, the expedition members came out to join them. Perhaps it was the sight of old friends, or simply the rarity of such a gathering, but the dwarves ate until their bellies were round and drank barrel after barrel. No one suggested a drinking contest this time. The next morning, after bidding the dwarves farewell, Leeway returned first to River Valley and told Gandalf to wait. He slipped alone into Helgate and emerged before noon leading 2 horses, the fastest, finest mounts from Roadside Fort. They run very fast and will save us a lot of time. See if you can handle them. He handed one to Gandalf. Mounting, Gandalf said, You do underestimate me, Leeway. I may look old. No sooner had he settled in the saddle than the horse bolted, full tilt, and Gandalf's voice trailed off as he raced away. You need to get used to it, Leeway called after him. It took a long moment for the old wizard to learn the animal's ways. Too fast, too strong. I finally understand how you cover ground so quickly. These are horses I've bred carefully, Leeway said, for some time, a few months at least. They set off together then. But before going to Isengard, Leeway stopped at Long Lake Town and found Bard in the mayor's office to explain the cooperation between River Valley and the Lonely Mountain. If other proposals come later, you can judge their feasibility yourself. I understand, Bard said. With that settled, Leeway and Gandalf rode south, crossing plains and rivers, heading straight for Isengard. The brown lands stretched around them. Leeway scanned the horizon. It's almost too quiet. Most likely, Gandalf replied. The route we take skirts the Black Gate and lies near some orc camps in the Misty Mountains. Normally nobody would want this road. Still, Leeway replied, with you and your sword here, nothing would dare come near. That's boring, Gandalf muttered. Sauron had been unnervingly quiet of late, no raids, no stirring. It was impossible to tell whether he had been weakened or was quietly plotting something vast. Days passed. At one point, Gandalf asked, Shall we stop? For what? I only meant it's not good to push horses 4 days straight without rest. They're special horses. They don't tire and don't need to eat. Such creatures exist? Gandalf asked. Haven't you seen them? All my animals are like this. Leeway tapped the amulet at his chest. There are a lot of things you can't imagine. Gandalf let the comment pass. They crossed the highlands of Rohan and reached the edge of Fangorn. Orthanc rose on the horizon, black and sharp against the sky. By midday they were at its base and tied their horses. Isengard, at this moment, was unexpectedly picturesque. Around the tower, fruit trees and gardens spread across the land. A clear stream ran through it into a small lake beside the tower. From the right vantage, the whole scene promised a sweeping, exhilarating view. The scenery here is wonderful, Leeway said, even better than my home. There are mountains, a lake, gardens, and forests. Fruit trees you can pick at dawn, dew still on them, Gandalf added. And in the center, that tower, so powerful and strange. I wonder what kind of person could live in such a place and still be dissatisfied. Leeway was taken by the sight. It had all the terrain and flat space anyone would want to build a home. Whoever had chosen this spot for Orthanc had an exceptional eye. It felt almost a shame that Saruman alone occupied such beauty. Be warned, Gandalf said quietly. His temper is odd. Leeway raised an eyebrow as Gandalf explained more bluntly. Don't pay too much mind to his words, and be careful of the way he leads a conversation. Every phrase has a certain magic to it. He can twist minds as a dragon twists hearts. Even orcs can fall under it. I doubt his magic will work on me, Leeway said, remembering the long talks he'd had with Smaug without being ensnared, and even earlier, Gandalf's own persuasive words had failed to control him. They walked up the black steps to the tower's main entrance. A servant blocked the doorway before they could enter. Lord Saruman did not expect visitors today. Who are you? The man's tone was cold, carrying the same hauteur as his master. Gandalf remained polite. I am Gandalf, Gandalf the Grey, and this is Lee Wei. We have come to visit. Please inform Saruman. We can wait here." The servant sneered. "Whether a wizard or some leeway, without Lord Saruman's permission, you may not enter. It is an iron decree from the Lord Saruman himself. Please leave." Gandalf looked helpless, but Leeway stepped past him and approached the door. The genial, easy expression vanished from his face, replaced by a cool indifference that had nothing to do with pride. There was a calmness that meant he simply did not care about the man's authority. The servant suddenly found himself backing away. The rumors about Leeway crowded his mind, and whatever courage his post lent him crumbled. "Go tell Lord Saruman that Leeway has come in peace," Leeway said slowly. "If he is too busy, I can wait, but I would prefer he receive word of our visit today." The servant swallowed. "Very well. Otherwise," Leeway added, the words like a cold wind, "this tower will be a ruin by tomorrow." Chapter 125, Purpose Discussion. "Why such harsh words, my friend?" No sooner had Leeway finished speaking than the door burst open and a figure in white robes stepped out. "Why was I not informed that such an esteemed guest had arrived?" he demanded. He glared at the attendant standing by the door, clearly displeased, and dismissed him. "You may go. You need not guard this door any longer." "Yes, my lord." The attendant bowed his head, obeyed, and hurried away. "Saruman?" Gandalf inclined his head slightly. Leeway nodded in return, a gesture of respect. Even before Saruman turned against the free cities, his personality had been difficult, arrogant, jealous, quick to scorn. It hadn't been the betrayal that made him unpleasant. It had been the years of haughty pride that led him there. It is rare to see the legend of the wilds, the founder of the free cities, the dragon slayer Lee Wei, grace my humble hall, Saruman said with a forced courtesy. The people below were impolite and spoke out of turn at the door. "I hope you will not hold that against them," Lee Wei replied. "Of course I won't." Saruman's expression stiffened. "Ah, ha, gentlemen, if you please, shall we go inside? A doorway is no place for conversation." He smiled with a polish that didn't reach his eyes. Gandalf moved to keep the peace, stepping between them and breaking their locked gazes. "I have no objection," Leeway responded first. "Then please, honored guest, lead the way." Saruman stared at him for a few seconds, then turned and made his way up the tower as if nothing had occurred. Gandalf shot Leeway an urgent, pleading look, but Leeway walked on, pretending not to notice. The two of them, so similar and yet so opposed, were a frightening pair. If they began to clash, Gandalf could not guarantee he could hold them back. He could only hope the Valar would keep them calm. The upper chamber of Orthanc was dim, carved from black stone, its light coming from stained glass windows and a few protected lamps. Saruman took the highest seat and lifted a cup of tea to his lips. Leeway and Gandalf sat at a small table below him, each with a cup before them. For a moment the hall was quiet enough to suggest a ceremonious tea tasting, if one ignored the tension thick in the air. Leeway sipped the tea, judged it harmless, and let his gaze wander. To the left, the room opened into a study strewn with papers and curious devices, Saruman's painstakingly gathered learning. To the right, a stone platform occupied the center of another chamber, and atop it lay something covered by a heavy, opaque cloth. Leeway's mind settled on the familiar form beneath the drape, the Stone of Seeing. The Palantir was a wondrous thing. It allowed its user to communicate across great distances and to watch places where other stones stood, a kind of magical lookout. Saruman had once used one to monitor Gandalf's movements. But the stone demanded a strong will. Those without it could be disoriented by visions the Palantir offered. Worse, one of the stones was now in Sauron's hands. Any careless use of another Palantir would risk a forced connection to him, revealing the user's location and inviting deadly attention. As a result, every Palantir not under Sauron's control had been covered, the camera stilled and shrouded. At that time, 4 Palantiri were known to exist in Middle-earth, one in Gondor, one here in Orthanc, one in the lands of Lindon, and one with Sauron. The Lindon stone was more ornamental than useful, able to gaze toward Aman across the sea, but not to the other stones. Gondor's belonged to the royal house, but with the throne vacant, no one had authority to use it. During later ages, the stone in Gondor was activated by the steward, Faramir's father in some accounts, who used it to watch Mordor. His mind withstood many assaults, but even he paid a heavy price. The clash with Sauron aged him prematurely and ultimately broke him when the White City fell. Some opposed Sauron to ruin without yielding, others bent after only a few forced visions. Strength of will made all the difference. "So," Saruman said, drawing Lewi's attention from the covered stone, "what does the much-talked-of visitor wish to do in my tower?" "I came for the books," Lewi answered simply. "I heard Orthanc keeps the wisest tomes in Middle-earth." Saruman regarded him with a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled disdain. "I see." He took another measured sip and, to Lewi's surprise, nodded. "Very well, you may consult them." The admission softened his features for an instant, but then his tone shifted. "However," he folded his hands and continued, "those books did not fall from the sky. I have collected and arranged them over many years. Some I compiled myself. They contain wisdom that mortals rarely encounter in a lifetime." Despite his rivalry with Gandalf, Saruman's kindred sense of duty toward greater causes forced him to cooperate when it suited him. But with mortals, he insisted on compensation. "Where there is gain, there must be return. I am sure you understand." All right, I understand." Lewi's reply was casual. He reached into his satchel, produced a small golden apple, and tossed it towards Saruman with a flick of his wrist. The apple arced through the air faster than Saruman could fully react. He only had time to raise a hand and catch it, the object thudding against his palm and then into his grasp. For a moment he flinched as if struck, hands closing reflexively around it, then annoyance colored his features. "What do you mean by throwing a heavy object at me? Why not look at what's in your hand?" Lewi replied. Saruman frowned, turning the apple over. "What else could it be but a trinket? When his gaze fell upon the object, his eyes widened so suddenly that the color drained from his face. Chapter 126, True Knowledge Crystal. How can anything so perfect exist in this world? Saruman couldn't sit still. He stood, held the golden apple up to the window, and examined it in the sunlight, eyes fixed on it as if he could not look away. "What is this?" Lewi answered calmly as Saruman's excitement simmered down and he sat again. "A golden apple, made from a great deal of gold. Eating it heals almost any wound, and it offers some protection against edged weapons." Gandalf said nothing, but Saruman's face lit up. "It is precious. For every one used, one is gone forever. Use it in the right place." He slid the apple into his robe, in a tone of genuine pleasure, added, "My esteemed guest has brought me a wonderful gift." "I can assure you," Lewi replied, "that for the time you are here, all the wisdom stored in this tower will be open to you. If there is anything you don't understand, come up to the higher levels and find me. If I am free, I will answer you. Isengard reputation, 30. How stingy, Lewi thought. For most people, 30 reputation would mean friendly, yet for Saruman it was still only guest. It suited him perfectly. Then I won't be polite. As they all assumed the matter settled, Lewi suddenly added, "In the room over there, is that the seeing stone?" Saruman's expression changed. He looked pleased. "Indeed, that is the Orthanc crystal. One purpose of this tower is to guard it." "May I see it?" "No," the two answers came at once. In this matter, Saruman agreed uncharacteristically with Gandalf. "For safety," Saruman warned, "I advise our guest not to entertain any thoughts about that crystal. Lewi, that thing cannot be taken lightly. One of its masters is Sauron. He would detect you." Gandalf chimed in with the same warning. "That's exactly why I want to see it." Lewi said coolly, "If he can see me, then I can see him. I'm curious what he's doing lately." Gandalf's face tightened. "Are you worried I might be corrupted by him?" he said. Lewi waved it off. "Have you forgotten, Gandalf? When I faced Sauron in Dol Guldur, I struck him well. If he couldn't harm me face to face, how could he affect me from a distance?" Saruman's expression darkened. "You are brave but reckless." Gandalf rose and held his staff horizontally. "Let's drop this. Lewi, it's unnecessary." Both of them, despite any private motives, were genuinely concerned for Lewi's safety. He stood in the doorway with his hands on his hips. "How about this? If there's the slightest sign that I'm being corrupted by Sauron, you can strike me down with your staffs. I'll make no complaint." Gandalf hesitated. Did he really need to see the crystal? Finally, he conceded. "All right." To Lewi's surprise, Saruman agreed readily. He gripped his black staff, its spiked tip gleaming, a hunger in his eyes that showed his true intentions for all to see. Gandalf muttered disapproval, shook his head, and then also took up his staff. The three of them walked to the chamber on the right. Leeway stood before the cloth-covered stone. Gandalf and Saruman flanked him, staffs held ready. "I feel a chill down my spine," Leeway admitted. "Don't worry," Saruman said softly. "I will be watching you." "Me too," Gandalf echoed. "That's why I feel a chill." No matter how hard their staffs were, Leeway thought, they wouldn't be as solid as Azog's steel hammer, then shrugged. Maybe they would be. He pulled back the thick black cloth. Beneath it lay the seeing stone, reflecting candlelight. Smooth and polished on the outside, its interior was as dark as a starless night, like black onyx that held shifting pinpricks of light, a rain of pale sparks in a place without light. It was both profound and strangely alive, a masterpiece even without its magic. Leeway reached out. As his fingers neared, the crystal awoke, actively linking to his mind with the sensation of operating a device by thought alone. "I see." Images flashed inside the stone. Gandalf and Saruman exchanged glances and leaned in. The first vision was of scorched, boundless land, Mordor, where little lived but twisted thorns and poisonous flowers that seemed to feed on malice. Then the view shifted to a gloomy green plain near Lake Nirn, where gaunt humans labored in fields under the lash of nearby orcs. "These are slaves taken by Sauron," Leeway said. "This land produces much of Mordor's food." "How many must they have seized?" Gandalf murmured. "They deserve to be freed," Leeway said. The scene changed again. An enormous army poured from an opening in the northern Ash Mountains and marched east. Among the troops were dozens of Ologs in full steel armor, rarer and tougher than even iron golems, hoisting colossal bludgeons whose heads were taller than a man. They were heading toward Rhûn. "The Easterlings," Saruman said, frowning. "They've long been allied with Sauron. At their height, they overran Rovanion and threatened Rohan and Gondor." "Khamûl, one of the Ringwraiths, is an Easterling," Gandalf added. "Why march to Rhûn?" Leeway asked, puzzled. Gandalf shook his head. Saruman's frown deepened as if he were piecing something together. Leeway moved to draw more from the stone, but suddenly the room went dark. The images in the crystal vanished. In its place burned a flaming eye, reflected in Leeway's pupils, boring straight through the space between them. Whispered thoughts invaded his mind. Corruption, 0.1%. The tiny progress bar that had seemed like a trifle suddenly ticked. "Sauron," all three said in low voices. Saruman tightened his grip on his staff, eyes flicking from the crystal to Leeway, searching for any opening. Gandalf held his staff out, and the ring on his hand glowed with fire, pushing back some of the darkness. Leeway met the gaze without flinching and, faintly amused, said, "We meet again, loser." To Sauron, that reply was devastating. Corruption, 0.0%. The sudden rise in corruption answered with a deeper, angrier darkness in the flames. Heat pressed through the seeing stone and lit the room. Whispers seeped from the shadow, probing for a place in Leeway's mind. He leant closer and at last understood them. "You will meet your death." Corruption, 0.31%. "So be it," Leeway said. "Better to die than to live half alive." A crushing pressure hit his consciousness. Shadows rushed in like a storm, trying to tear apart his reason. His breath became shallow, then barely possible. Still, the inner flame did not gutter. If anything, it burned firmer, more stubborn, refusing to be snuffed. "I will find you, and then I will kill you," hissed a foul voice inside his head. "You can't kill me," Leeway answered. Whoosh! The dark shape in the seeing stone collapsed. The images died. Leeway's vision swam. He stepped back, feeling oddly light. Corruption %. "Let me help you," Saruman snapped, raising his staff as if to strike at whatever had infested the stone. He swung so hard the wood whistled through the air. Clang! The sound was half metal, half wood. Gandalf had intercepted Saruman's staff with his own, blocking the blow and steadying Leeway. Saruman glared. "Gandalf, no need," Gandalf said quietly, easing Saruman's staff aside. "He isn't corrupted." Leeway swallowed and steadied himself. "I'm fine, thanks to you. It's nothing." "Nothing?" Gandalf's voice carried warning. "You've angered Sauron. He will look for a way to retaliate. Be on your guard. His dark craft is subtle. He might come for you unnoticed. If anything goes wrong, go to Rivendell or the Golden Wood. There are people there who can help. And Radagast may have means too. Or," he glanced at Saruman, "come to me." Saruman sheathed his staff and stepped forward with practiced civility. You may come to me as well. I will help. Gandalf inclined his head. He still trusted Saruman. Leeway felt no need to argue the point. He covered the seeing stone and let the matter drop. It was too dangerous to linger. He had been in Middle-earth 2 years now. The travel had steeled him. Had this happened when he first arrived, things might have gone much worse. With the immediate danger behind him, Leeway turned to the tower's libraries. He walked the aisles of shelves, scanning titles, looking for anything that might spark an idea. What do you want to read, Leeway? Gandalf offered. I've been here a long time. I know many of the books. Something on magic, Leeway said. There's plenty. Gandalf smiled and led him down a row. Soon they had a pile of volumes on a table. Leeway stared at the names until his scalp tingled. Just the titles could fill a small book of their own. All right, he muttered, I'll read them. From that day he lived in the library, poring over books from dawn to dusk. Gandalf read with him for a few days, then left once he was satisfied. Leeway and Saruman had no new quarrel. Time waits, the Grey Wizard said. I must be on my way. Saruman dropped by occasionally, puzzled and faintly annoyed by Leeway's relentless work. Do you not sleep? He asked once. I don't want someone to die in my tower. Saruman's tone was warning, not accusation. Leeway didn't bother to explain. Saruman left, but posted an order with a servant as he went. Watch him. Don't let him die in there. If a notable guest perished under his roof, Saruman knew how scandalous it would be. Leeway paid the surveillance little mind. He buried himself in the stacks and found, frustratingly, that most of the so-called magic books were not practical manuals at all, but histories, rumors, and poems, an entangled mass of lore from every age. One book even told of a mysterious hermit living in the old forest of the Shire. There was variety in abundance, but almost no instruction, no systematic teaching of spellcraft, no recipes or step-by-step technique. The few practical references were buried in cultural descriptions, incidental and vague. Still, not all was wasted. Among the volumes he found 2 with Saruman's marginal notes, brief jottings, flashes of insight about the viz that underpinned the world. They were fragmentary and unfocused, hints rather than finished theory. The heart of Saruman's work, Leeway realized, was probably in the wizard's private laboratory. Sigh! Leeway pushed himself up, brushed dust from his clothes, and opened the library door. A servant who had dozed by the threshold started, stammered a greeting, and hurried off. Leeway climbed the tower's staircases, treating the ascent as a tour. Bookshelves were the tower's chief decoration. Shelves rose like cliffs of knowledge from floor to ceiling, rooms connected in a complex pattern. Most rooms were stacks and reading chambers. Only a few small rooms were set aside for living or research. Rounding a corner, he found a proper alchemy room. An altar table, grinders, and scattered notes on the desk by the window. The ink looked recently dried and still fresh. Leeway seized a loose sheet and read the heading, Enchanting Metal Materials. Where, 2 years before, the jargon would have been gibberish, his months among those volumes had sharpened him. He could make sense of a few lines, and that gave him hope, enough to warrant seeking out Saruman's laboratory. Infuse the material with vis. Leeway stared at the page of notes in the sunlight, scratching his head. An idea flickered at the edge of his mind, as if separated by a thin membrane he couldn't quite pierce. It was the maddening feeling of knowing something without being able to name it. He understood it only dimly. Truth, he thought, could not be grasped by a hurried glance. A voice sounded behind him. Saruman. Our guest seems to lack manners. That's my private property. Saruman snatched the notes from Leeway's hand and slammed them on the table. It is difficult to comprehend. Leeway could only agree with a wry chuckle. Saruman sneered. Wisdom isn't for everyone. Forcing your eyes on things you can't understand will hurt your mind. I suggest you go downstairs and read children's stories for now. It will broaden your horizons. Perhaps you're right, Leeway shrugged. Still, what do you make of this research on the table? Saruman folded his arms. It's not for you. I have nothing to say. He picked up a small lens from the table and began examining the ore before him. If you have no further questions, leave. I'm busy. Leeway ignored the barbed tone and focused on the little glass object in Saruman's hand. What is that? A tool for studying materials, Saruman said without looking up. This lens lets you see textures, metal and such, more clearly. It helps one understand their essence. May I? Of course. The lens felt oddly familiar as Li Wei took it. He raised it and looked through. At first, he saw only Saruman's stern-lined face. Then he turned the lens toward a glass of water nearby. The dim light called up a faint reflection of the room, and as he watched the rippling surface, he thought about water's paradoxes. Hard enough to carve through stone over time, soft enough to caress a fingertip. A flash of insight struck. Water, rigid enough to cut mountains, yet soft enough to cradle a finger. This viz exists in water and all things that contain it. It is the source of life. A piece of knowledge about water flowed into his mind and settled there. A prompt blinked into being. Gained water vis knowledge point 1. New options appeared in his crafting interface. Li Wei placed the lens carefully on the table. Did you perceive anything? Saruman asked. I perceived the wisdom of water. Li Wei answered. A smile tugged at his mouth. Saruman gave a disdainful snort. A crude barbarian putting on airs. He tossed the small remark aside and held out his hand. Here, take this. Your tower is dark. You might find it useful. Li Wei produced a bottle. A night vision potion. It helps one see outlines in the dark. Saruman examined the vial, then set it aside casually. Such an effect wasn't rare. He could reproduce it if he wished. Still, the potion contained some magical viz and was useful for study, a reasonable consultation fee. Very well, I accept. Thank you. Li Wei's reputation value remained unchanged. He hardly noticed. He left Saruman's laboratory with a small thrill. Viz, the occult framework, had revealed itself. A new module had unlocked. The mystical age was dawning. He didn't waste a moment. The next morning, he saddled his horse at dawn, informed his attendant, and rode straight back to Roadside Fort. Life there went on as usual. Farmers tilling, miners clattering along in carts, fishermen waiting by the river, and small groups of residents arguing over house plans. Then Li Wei appeared on an empty plot outside the city wall, a backpack full of materials on his shoulders. He laid a large serrated stone circle on the ground and began building upward along its rim, erecting a massive foundation. It was a tower, a colossal fortress tower, its base several times the diameter of the castle when seen from above. Sauron had Barad-dûr, Saruman had Orthanc. Now Li Wei was building his own tower, sturdy, grand, and practical. He had always liked big projects, and with the mystical age arriving, a wizard's tower was essential. So he set to work. For the next month, whenever residents had a spare moment, they climbed the city wall to watch the tower rise by the lake. Many had never seen Li Wei build anything with his own hands. Where they expected a handful of people and a day's magic, they got one man who single-handedly accomplished feats that rivaled entire crews. He slept one night, and while they weren't looking, entire sections of the stonework would soar skyward. That gray tower grew from a foundation into a colossal spire before the season ended. Passers-by craned their necks and could not see the top. Some residents even recorded it. And all of this was done by our Lord alone, one entry read. We finally understand how Roadside Fort was built when this land was wilderness. This must have been a feat that left neighboring towns open-mouthed. The note was dated, recorded in 2942, autumn. As autumn leaves fell, the region remained peaceful, save for the sudden appearance of the fortress tower. When Roadside Fort's caravan set out, laden with specialties and fine wine, the tower was still only a foundation. By the time the wagons returned from their circuit, the spire had reached its summit. Standing on the tower's roof with the wind cutting at his clothes, Li Wei looked down at the tiny world below and up at the clouds within arm's reach. He spread his arms and breathed in deeply. A thorough all-nighter, he thought with satisfaction. Now the real work could begin. With a quick motion, he put on his elytra and launched into a slow, spiraling descent to the tower's main entrance. Little Pink, grazing nearby, saw her master land and scampered over, rubbing her head against Li Wei's leg. Her eyes shone with longing for the sky. Li Wei scratched her dragon's snout and glanced at a patch of bald grass where she'd been snuffling and eating. He paused, then said, "You should eat less of that stuff in the future." Chapter 129. Not yet decided. Did I not feed it enough meat, or did the thing just genuinely prefer vegetables? Li Wei was speechless at Little Pink's strange taste. Oh well, if it wanted to eat grass, let it eat grass. As long as it didn't starve, that was fine. Grass wasn't useless, it might even be nutritious. Shaking his head, Liwei pushed open the great door of the Orthanc Tower and stood on the steps, not moving forward. There was nothing inside. The tower was still only a shell, an outer skin with a hollow, pitch-black interior. Not even a floor had been built. It was like an empty cardboard box. The outermost layer stood, but the inside was completely void. It was not how a normal building would look, but this was Liwei's project. It didn't matter as long as it wouldn't collapse. He could build whatever part he wanted first. Liwei had never seen Sauron's Barad-dûr and didn't know its exact scale, but this tower before him was at least as imposing as Saruman's Orthanc, probably taller. In any case, another grand tower would soon be added to the world's roster of named structures. He hadn't thought of a name for it yet. Putting the naming aside for the moment, Liwei sent Little Pink off to play and returned to the warehouse. He unpacked a pile of materials and began planning the interior of the tower's lowest level. The floor had to come first, then lighting, a library, a reception hall, and stairs to the upper levels. A few days later, the first floor was divided into several large chambers. Most of them were still empty, but the library was being renovated and turned into Liwei's research area. There he forged his first iron-shod wooden staff. Next to the bookshelf, he built his first research table and his first arcane workbench. This was the first step into mysticism, the foundation for all future research. The arcane workbench would be used to synthesize magical items, while the research table would be used to study and unlock new knowledge and recipes. Researching new knowledge consumed Viz knowledge points, similar to the points he had earned when researching water in Orthanc. Each source could only yield a knowledge point once, and those points were spent during research. Without enough points, research couldn't continue. That meant mysticism research would inevitably take him to many places, scanning and analyzing everything visible in the world with his lens. Snap. Liwei tapped his staff, and a square bookshelf dissolved into a floating book that hovered in midair, Manual of Magics. It contained fragments of unknown mystic research that would have to be revealed and deciphered over time. After feeding Little Pink, Liwei sat at the research table, picked up his pen and ink, and began the Viz connect the dots. The first life in the world was born from minerals and water. Earth plus water equals life. Human civilization first discovered, controlled, and harnessed fire. The energy released by orderly flame illuminated the path of civilization. Fire's order, its energy. When a liquid becomes chaotic, it becomes poison. Water chaos, poison. As new Viz concepts appeared on the research table, the basic Viz knowledge points Liwei had gathered while scanning during the tower's construction slowly drained away. He kept going until he had revealed all the Viz from the basics up to the 7th tier that he remembered. At that point, his knowledge points were essentially exhausted and he couldn't proceed further. Time to go out and find new materials. Mysticism and travel were inseparable. Perfect timing. See how the other project is coming along, he muttered. Grabbing his Manual of Magic's lens, Liwei stepped into the Hellgate and sped toward River Valley City, drawing awed, reverent looks from the residents as he went. He hadn't gone far before he stopped at the sight of a faint transparent light floating by the roadside. An aura node. In the Mystic Age, to use Viz to make items on an arcane workbench or to cast spells, you needed a staff, and the magic in a staff didn't appear from nowhere. It had to be charged. In the early days, before other methods were developed, most mystics relied on 2 ways to charge staffs. The first was to draw from naturally occurring aura nodes, stable concentrations of magical Viz that usually contained multiple Viz types and slowly replenished after being absorbed. Aura nodes were hard to spot with the naked eye. They required a Manual of Magic's lens to reveal. Their advantage was that they were almost free and recyclable. They simply took time to recharge. The second, simpler but harsher method was to kill. When a living creature died, the primordial Viz in its body dissipated and could be absorbed by a staff. Brutal, so most mystics preferred the non-violent approach. There were 6 types of Viz a staff could use directly: earth, fire, air, water, and chaos. The node in front of Liwei contained 2 basic Viz, fire and earth. He marked the location on his map, placed some blocks on the ground as a visible marker, then set off again with his lens. Because the world's rules differed, aura nodes didn't exist in Middle-earth. They were found only in the Nether and seemed to update dynamically with Liwei's presence. Magic in Middle-earth often sprang from a powerful soul or an extension of will. The vis-based magic of the Mystic Age, by contrast, came from external concentrations of aura and primordial vis. Their effects could look similar, but the underlying mechanisms were entirely different. Liwei continued along the road. Whenever his lens picked up a bright spot, he stopped, marked it, and charged the iron-shod wooden staff in his hand. By the time he reached River Valley City, most of the day had passed, and his backpack was full of fully charged staffs, enough to keep him going for a while. He stepped out of the Hellgate at dusk. The last light of the sun spilled through the mountain gaps and painted the paving stones a warm red. River Valley City was no quieter for the twilight. The streets bustled with people, children ran through the markets, and the city seemed even more prosperous than when he'd left. Dwarves walked the streets as easily as humans now, and that meant Liwei would need to be more alert when he moved through the crowds from now on. As twilight faded, the city's lights never went out. Rows of torch braziers along the streets kept everything bright. The steady glow made the place feel like it would never sleep. When people saw the familiar black armor and longsword, they dipped their heads to Liwei. Not just the residents of River Valley, but even some of the dwarves nodded in respect to their lord. At night, Liwei walked the route he remembered to Bard's little house and found a warm light still burning inside. Bard was awake. "What are you busy with?" Liwei asked as he pushed the door open. Without any formal greeting, he sat across from Bard at the desk and started talking. Some financial matters in town. Bard had grown used to Liwei's sudden appearances. He set his papers down, fetched a pot of hot water, brewed a cup of tea, and placed it in front of Liwei. "Want something to eat?" he offered. "No, I'm fine." Liwei took a sip and motioned for Bard to continue. The road between River Valley and Long Lake Town has been fixed a while now. It's popular. On the second day after it opened, people were already driving carriages and running quick trips back and forth. Many can make several round trips a day. "Our cooperation with Erebor is going well," Bard said. "A few talented people there have learned to make improved tools. The number of blacksmiths and artisans has risen noticeably." Bard glanced at the reports on the table, thinking of the recent developments. Midway through, he suddenly looked up as if he'd been pulled by a thought. Liwei was holding a gold-rimmed glass lens to his eye, studying him. Human, thought, senses, soul, motion. Liwei murmured, noting something new. "What is that?" Bard asked, puzzled. "Your viz composition," Liwei said, and then set the lens down. "Never mind, carry on." "All right," Bard resumed. "There's also the land beside the main road. The terrain's good. We could build more houses and extend the town outward." "Do it. I'll put the idea forward." River Valley didn't need a lot of management. With two leaders whose reputations were rock solid, the residents were conscientious and public order was excellent. Everyone here had lived through that era firsthand. Bard nodded and added, "Oh, and if you have time, go see the central square. There are new things there." "I will." Liwei left Bard's house and went back into the streets, lens in hand, scanning everything. Residents watched curiously as their lord peered around with the glass. What they didn't know was that Liwei was learning more than appearances. He was reading the town's vis signatures. Objects and people carried basic vis, yet each person had additional qualities that marked their individuality. Blacksmiths carried a tool vis. Dwarves tended to show earth, metal, and mineral vis. After a long walk through the city, gathering knowledge from buildings and people, Liwei looked up at the highest palace and noticed it had been almost completely restored. A few parts still looked rough and in need of polish, but the overall repair meant the city's infrastructure was in good shape. Bard would not have prioritized the palace otherwise. Climbing up to the palace to look around, Liwei admired the craftsman's skill. He then turned his gaze to the central square and froze. "Is that a statue?" In the middle of the square stood an exquisitely carved stone monument, a tableau from a great moment in the town's history. Its base was a fierce dragon's head, On it stood two figures, one in front of the other. The front figure bore black armor and a longsword, exactly Li Wei. Behind him was Bard with a yew longbow and a black arrow slung like a spear. The sculpture was vivid and lifelike. A master artisan had clearly crafted it. Li Wei lingered for a long while, studying every detail before moving on. He observed the city late into the night, filling his head with new knowledge. The next morning came with a soft knock at Bard's door. The old hinges creaked, and Bard opened the door looking composed and well-rested, which made Li Wei wonder if he'd been awake all night too. "I saw the statue," Li Wei said. "It's superb. Was it your idea?" "No," Bard replied. "An artisan proposed it, and the residents voted to build it." "It's excellent." Li Wei settled at the table by the window, looking out toward Long Lake Town. Back to the road. Now that the residents are used to the current main route, it's time to extend it further. Extend? Get ready. We're going to Long Lake Town. I'll start the project. Bard's expression tightened. "You mean the Sky Road?" After taking care of his affairs, that morning Li Wei and Bard stood at the west end of Long Lake Town, at the terminus of the newly built road. Not far beyond lay the Black Forest. Building a conventional road would mean hacking through obstacles, but Li Wei had another idea. "What next?" Bard asked. "Watch," Li Wei said. He took out a stone, set it on the ground, jumped, and placed a block beneath his feet. A stone pillar shot straight up into the sky. From that height, Li Wei could see the black ridges of the Black Forest to his left, and the red-leaf trees and the Elven King's underground palace to his right, high enough to clear their living spaces, and low enough not to interfere with the elves. He spread a stone platform outward from the top of the pillar until it cast a wide shadow below. Bard stared upward, neck craned, while Li Wei donned his elytra, glided down, and continued building the road from where the residents had stopped. This new route curved and climbed at a gentle, steady incline, upward instead of across the ground. Li Wei worked until sunset. That evening in Long Lake Town, Bard was eating at an inn, rubbing his stiff neck. Across from him, a road worker joked, "I hope your legs don't go to jelly once we start." "Legs go to jelly?" the worker repeated, offended. "What kind of road would do that? I've been building roads a long time." "You'll see tomorrow," Bard replied. "I hope we can recruit enough brave people for the job." "I'll do it, my lord," the worker said. At that moment, Alfred slipped up from the side, drawing looks and a few groans from the other diners. The fellow had a knack for showing up out of nowhere. Still, after working with them so long, Alfred had begun to show signs of reform. He'd kept out of trouble and worked steadily, which had won him some grudging approval. "You? Brave?" Bard said with a twist of his mouth. One of the road workers couldn't resist. "You hiding behind women's clothes, is that your bravery?" Laughter erupted around the table. Alfred flushed bright red, puffed out his chest, and shot back loudly, "Not every man has the guts to wear women's clothes." The laughter got louder. A maid carrying dishes squeezed past Alfred, nudged him aside, and put the plates down, smiling to herself. Even a comic could build a little goodwill. Bard put down his knife and fork with a tired sigh. "Do what you want. Go if you want. Don't go if you don't. I don't have time to argue. Our Lord has me busy enough." He added, half to himself, "Now, I need to draft a high-altitude construction safety guide." Thanks to Book Mountain fellow Taoist for the 5,000 coin reward. Thanks to Awakened for the 100 coin reward. Thanks to Feng Cheng Ching for the 100 coin reward. And thanks to everyone who voted. Thank you for your support. Chapter 131, The Beginning. Winding roads climbed into the sky. Spiral minecart tracks, gear-driven lifts built with dwarven engineering. These were the main components of the Sky Road's entrance. Unlike ordinary ground routes, Sky Roads brought inherent dangers. Their height, the need for reliable operation of many mechanisms, but each hazard had a solution. A proper road required many auxiliary installations, lighting and guardrails, maintenance for the ascent and descent. If it had been an ordinary lift, wear and tear might eventually cause a failure. But the parts Li Wei had synthesized and assembled made accidents all but impossible. The system's stability was essentially maximized. Li Wei had stayed on the road for several days, repairing the most difficult and complex initial section himself. After that, the work became routine mechanical labor. When he sent word, Bard rushed over without stopping and looked up. A massive stone pillar soared toward the sky, supporting a short stretch of roadway above. The path was flat and smooth, lined with torchlit street lamps and sturdy railings. Near the entrance stood a small hut to serve as a rest point. "Even as it is, it's a miracle," someone murmured. "This is not a miracle," Leeway said, remembering old tales. "Have you heard of Khazad-dûm, Moria?" "I know of it. They say dark creatures gathered there. It became a stronghold for orcs and monsters." "It wasn't always like that." Leeway told the story. Khazad-dûm used to stretch through the misty mountains, up into peaks and down to underground rivers. It was a vast, continuous city, no shortcuts, no compromises. "That was a true hall of wonders known across the world," Bard agreed. Compared to Moria, Leeway's bastion tower or the roadside forts were small. Leeway could build these only because he could synthesize components and assemble them perfectly. Imagining the labor needed to carve Moria's scale made Bard admire ancient dwarven craftsmanship all the more. "Dwarven skill is astonishing," he said. "Do you still think this project is impossible?" Leeway asked. "No," Bard replied. "I never thought it impossible." "Good. Then let's begin." Leeway named Bard Director of Road Construction and walked him along the entrance, explaining each feature: the gentle main road for ascent, the spiral minecart track for hauling blocks and materials, and for anyone with a taste for thrills, a chance to ride the fast rotation. Then, Leeway stepped onto a lift platform and motioned Bard to join him. The platform was enclosed, stable, fitted with multiple safety mechanisms, perhaps unnecessary, but installed anyway. At its lowest point, there was even a holding pool. The system had multiple safeguards and tremendous load capacity. Its strength could be increased to meet greater demands. When they stood on it, the platform felt steady as solid ground. Leeway pulled the lever. The lift rose at an even pace. Such movements were routine to him and to miners, but Bard felt a rush of unfamiliar excitement. A faint lightness touched his stomach. Though no coward, he had climbed towers to face dragons and aimed true in those dangerous winds. He had never been in a dwarven lift before. The sensation of upward motion was new to him. "This is wonderful. I'd only heard of such things," Bard breathed, steadying himself with a few deep breaths. "You'll be using it a lot from now on," Leeway said. At the top, they stepped out into the high-altitude breeze. Bard walked to the railing and looked over the sea of trees, their treetops gleaming in the sunlight. "That's the true woodland realm," he said. "Not the so-called Black Forest, the Great Greenwood." As a descendant of the former Lord of Dale, Bard knew some of the old histories. The Greenwood was grand and beautiful, yet it had been corrupted. Spiders and darker powers had driven many of its people underground, forcing them into cavernous halls and leaving their surface realm much less safe. They used to have to come out only by river or along certain paths, Leeway added. Even those weren't entirely safe. Orcs could cross the rivers if given time. "But now," Bard began. "Everything will be different," Leeway answered. He set an iron golem down beside the road like a sentry. It would patrol and keep the entrance secure. "The woodland elves are actually eager to talk," he said. "Years of attacks made them wary, but to those they trust they are warm and hospitable." Bard looked toward the palace, far off and sighed. "The king seems cold, but he's very compassionate. I don't know how to repay him." "Send him more fine wine from Dorwinion," Leeway suggested. "Haven't their cargo ships been arriving lately?" "All right," Bard said with a short laugh. "I'll do that." With the construction route decided, Bard rounded up the road crews waiting in Long Lake Town and led them to the entrance. The townsfolk gathered before the load-bearing stone pillars, decorative as much as structural, and exchanged nervous glances. "Are we going up there?" someone asked. "Yes," Bard called out. "If anyone is afraid of heights, you may step back now. No one will be forced." He scanned the group. No one moved. He could see the answer in their faces. It would be shameful to withdraw before even trying. They prepared to begin. The Sky Road's first steps were finished. A new chapter of travel and trade would start from this very pillar, with lifts and tracks reaching into the air, guarded by iron and guided by dwarven craft. The beginning, once uncertain, now felt like progress finally taking wing. Chapter 132. Tower test taker batch after batch of people rode the rising platforms up to the construction front. From the Sky Road's edge, they were greeted by a shimmering sea of golden-leaved trees, a magnificent sight that eased a lot of the vertigo. Most of the newcomers stayed, though a few who felt faint at the height shook their heads and climbed back down. "I'm sorry," one of them said, hand on the railing. "I can walk on solid ground fine, but near the edge, I can't even breathe." A few with acrophobia left the site, but those who remained still felt uneasy. Working up here looked dangerous. Dwarves, who were used to steep mountain cliffs and subterranean pits, seemed better suited for this kind of work. After a quick screening to pick reliable road pavers, Project Director Bard began assigning teams and laying out procedures. Each work party had to have at least 2 people tied together by a safety rope, one to manage the rope and keep things stable, the other to do the actual paving. With systems in place, the road crept forward little by little. Ore carts slid along the rails from Long Lake Town toward River Valley, ferrying up the materials that kept the project moving. The project's activity eventually reached Thorin, who had been deep in the mountains. He came down quickly to see what was happening. Bard explained Leeway's plan. After the Lonely Mountain expedition, Thorin and Bard stood side by side again in Long Lake Town, gazing up at the Sky Road. Thorin didn't look shocked by the sudden undertaking. If anything, he was impressed. Dwarves had their own standards when it came to construction. "Your road crews aren't very experienced at height," Thorin observed, watching the tentative workers. Bard admitted, "This is their first time working so high. Before this, the tallest things we handled rarely exceeded a palace." Thorin's mouth twitched into a smile. "For you it may be high, Master Bard, but if you went deep into the mountains or into the pits we mine, you'd find heights like this are nothing." Bard nodded. "We often work in such places. The only real difference is it's brighter up here." Compared to the exposed sky and the mountain dome, the underground currents and mineral canyons were actually more dangerous. "The diligence and bravery of dwarves are unmatched," Thorin said. Bard conceded the point. "Then what are the King Under the Mountain's suggestions for our project?" Thorin's tone softened. "I can't just watch you work with inefficient methods. You're following the old way, groping along a path we've already learned. Why not consult those with more experience?" He reached out to pat Bard on the shoulder, but his height made the gesture awkward. He stopped halfway. Bard, seeing the awkwardness, naturally extended his hand and clasped Thorin's instead. "Maybe next time we'll sit down," Bard thought, "and make it easier for Thorin to reach." "Thank you, Your Majesty. I won't forget this," Bard said, choosing a respectful, humble tone. Bard knew how to deal with proud types from his dealings with Thranduil. Thorin looked pleased. "You're welcome. I didn't come down just for this." That line sounded familiar to Bard. He hesitated, but Thorin continued, "I'll send skilled dwarves from Erebor to help you adapt and show you how we work." In a few sentences, they finalized a technical assistance agreement. They also spoke about food supplies, meats, wines, and the specialties from River Valley and Long Lake Town. Then, Thorin asked, "Where is Leeway?" The project hadn't been underway long. Its initiator wasn't on site. "Leeway went back to Roadside Fort," Bard answered. "He said he'd gathered enough viz and needs to research something." "Looks like our friend has taken up wizardry," Thorin said. "He's a bit like a wizard. Sometimes he's even more mysterious than they are." Mysterious indeed. After confirming the project could continue, Leeway hurried home to begin the next stage of his work. Now that he had unlocked all the different types of vis and accumulated a large store, it was time to study the unknown entries in the magic guidebook. Leeway opened the book, ink and pen at hand. Chapter 1, Basic Studies, An Introduction to the Foundations of Mysticism. It contained little true discovery. Mostly it cataloged common mystical objects and materials. Only specific entries required active research. For example, Node in a Jar was a spell that allowed a node to be sealed and carried away. Researching it required 5 vis and 13 connection steps. A familiar feeling. It's all coming back, Leeway murmured as he copied his first research note. Mystical research was more like solving a puzzle than running experiments. To create a working note, you had to connect 2 or more kinds of vis from a starting point to an endpoint using related vis. If you wanted to link water and earth, for instance, you'd typically need life between them. Life is made of water and earth, so life was the logical intermediary. Only logically compatible vis could be connected. When a connection succeeded, the copied note became a researched note, and you could use it to learn the technique. If the connection failed, the note was wasted, and you had to copy it and try again. Early research steps were simple and required few vis. The farther you progressed, the more vis had to be linked, and the more complicated the steps became, often enough to give a person a headache. In the past, Leeway had relied on specialized tools or websites to calculate optimal connection combinations, or at worst, used other people's solutions. Now he had only his own knowledge. Fortunately, he'd collected plenty of vis, so he could afford to lose some and start over. And so the tower's problem solver set out on the path of discovery. Chapter 133, Mystery and Taboo. In mysticism, there is a category of study called forbidden knowledge. Along with forbidden knowledge comes another phenomenon, vis. Every time someone acquires forbidden knowledge, their vis increases. The higher the vis, the more likely strange phenomena are to manifest. Mild cases might be a sudden puddle of viscous, cursed water appearing underfoot, a sudden dimming of the eyes that makes vision blur, or an unceasing ravenous hunger that nothing will satisfy. More severe cases can produce hallucinations, sometimes of countless tiny spiders crawling out of the void to attack the afflicted. Even if only the victim can see those spiders, letting them tear at you can be fatal. So if you ever see a mystic fighting thin air, do not be surprised. They are defending themselves. Beyond hallucinations, other effects can occur. Sudden bursts of heat and spontaneous combustion, curses that eat away at the body, or phenomena that make the sufferer a source of contamination, tainting any life that touches them. Some vis effects are purely personal, which, perversely, is the better outcome. Others are neutral or even useful. One notorious example is the death gaze, a phenomenon that appears only in those whose vis has become disastrously high. People with death gaze have narrowed vision and cannot see far, but anything they lay eyes on slowly withers until death. The gaze does not harm its bearer and can even be used offensively. All in all, the strange consequences of forbidden knowledge are numerous and capricious. They can strike at any time, and most cannot be cured by ordinary remedies. One must simply endure them. Some arise from the turmoil within the researcher's own mind after studying the forbidden, while others are the result of disturbing beings from the outer realms, entities that notice the forbidden researchers and attempt to send minions or exert influence through the void. When a mystic touches the forbidden can reach back. From the official start of his research until now, Leeway felt his vis had accumulated considerably. His vision had dimmed several times, but he had not experienced the worst kinds of phenomena. None of the clear, direct interferences from outer realm entities. It was as if something isolated this place. Those outer influences could not penetrate here. Only the vis that originated from the researcher himself seemed to be active. The outer realm entities could not interfere. Does that mean I can research forbidden knowledge as I please? Leeway thought, thanking the god of creation. Most vis effects weren't life-threatening to him, but being periodically harassed was annoying, especially effects that could affect others. There existed a substance called exorcism soap that could remove temporary vis, but permanent, deep-seated vis remained. Permanent vis almost always bore the mark of some external existence. Until recently, Leeway had worried. Now he felt reassured. The creator of this world had held the line for him. Whatever those outer realm things were, they were of far lower status than Arda's god of creation. They could not touch this place, not even as formidable as Sauron. Days passed quickly. One morning, Leeway walked out of the tower into warm sunlight and felt much of his vis had subsided. During his isolation, he had unlocked every chapter and section of mysticism, every one except evocation, the branch that reaches toward the outer void. Unlocking evocation required a grimoire of evocation, an item typically carried only by cultists. There were clearly no such cultists in Middle-earth, not yet at least. It wasn't a showstopper. Many of evocation's secrets were not essential. Being a proper mystic without it would be more than enough. Now everything was ready to begin the first major long-term project of his mysticism work, the infusion altar. This device can infuse magical vis into mundane objects, or combine multiple viz-bearing items into something extraordinary, true alchemy. Unlike a simple crafting table, the infusion altar is a multi-block construct that requires a dedicated area. The tower's first floor already had a layout, so Li Wei claimed the second floor for infusion and magical craftwork. He consumed the viz stored in numerous ordinary wooden staves and prepared the materials for the altar. Bang! As the 25 points of viz stored in a wooden staff with a gilded tip were fully expended, a square runic matrix rose into being. The arcane stone blocks at the four corners reshaped into cylindrical pillars that guarded the matrix. This was the heart of the infusion altar. It performed computations and executions and could store a modest amount of viz, a simple magical computer. Li Wei set a ring of pedestals around it to complete the altar's basic form. It still wasn't finished. Magical work is risky, and errors can occur when creating advanced items. The way to reduce error rates was to surround the altar with a large number of magical items. This was when the rotten flesh he had hoarded from past orc encounters proved useful. Rotten flesh can be refined in a crucible into magical grease, which can be made into grease candles, cheap but effective magical implements. Li Wei made a trip back to Roadside Fort, opened an old chest, and pulled out several stacks of rotten flesh. Little Pink, curious, came over, sniffed, and withdrew in disgust. Li Wei grinned. "Let us thank the orcs," he said to no one. "They have made an indelible contribution to mysticism." Soon, 169 grease candles were placed around the base of the infusion altar, lending it stability. With the fully equipped altar in place, Li Wei opened the Thaumonomicon and constructed the other essential facilities, placing them on the tower's second floor. Then he faced another problem: elemental shards. Elemental shards were indispensable for mysticism. Normally they were mined from the world, but Middle-earth had no such ores, nor did the Nether generate them. Without elemental shards, mysticism was crippled. Fortunately, the Thaumonomicon described another method. Quartz shards could be refined in a crucible with basic elements and transformed into elemental shards of the corresponding attribute. That solved the shortage of this crucial resource. With all the prerequisites met, Li Wei set about his work. He tinkered with bottles and jars, used a viz distiller to separate viz from various materials, and crafted a quartz staff. This staff held 75 points of viz, 3 times the storage of a wooden staff. The upgrade felt like going from a wooden sword to an iron blade. 75 points was a notable threshold. A more powerful staff, the silver tree staff, stored 100 points, while a great wood staff held only 50. This world lacked silver trees and great oaks, but trees that contained viz, trees like the silver tree, weren't unheard of on the continent. Li Wei's thoughts drifted eastward to the golden wood on the slope of the Misty Mountains, the realm of Lady Galadriel, Lothlorien. There the ground was dotted with malorn trees, silver-white trunks and golden leaves, trees not native to Middle-earth, but originating from the sacred lands of the West. Valinor. Chapter 134, Rune Shield. Although not on the same level as the malorn of Valinor, the malorn trees of the Golden Wood were still tall and magnificent, and most of Lothlorien's dwellings were built among their branches. Maybe these trees could substitute for the silver tree. Both species were steeped in magic and had a natural purifying power. Their natures were very similar. That made the Golden Wood a place Li Wei had to visit. He hadn't forgotten that Lady Galadriel had once invited him to be her guest there while he was in Rivendell, but he'd never found the time. He resolved he should go soon. A trip to the Golden Wood was decided. But first, Li Wei returned to the castle and pulled out his materials: amber, wool, silk thread, glowstone powder, gold ingots. After organizing them, he used gold nuggets to synthesize a plain, pure gold ring. He placed the ring on the core pedestal at the center of the enchanting altar and set the other materials on the auxiliary pedestals. Then he went to the alchemy area, distilled the required viz, and stored it by type in viz jars: energy, magic, and protection. Those 3 would fill the last gap in his defenses, a lack of magical protection. Standing before the runic matrix of the altar, Li Wei couldn't help but feel a little smug. Saruman the White Wizard had long sought to emulate Sauron, forging rings of great power. He would never have imagined someone he thought a crude barbarian might make something similar before him. "Rune shield ring," Li Wei murmured. The matrix hummed to life. The materials on the side pedestals broke down and dissolved into their pure essences, flowing into the gold ring at the center. The viz from the jars converged into the ring as well. With the blessing of the ritual candles, the enchantment proceeded smoothly, without mishap. When the runic matrix stopped, the ring at the center gave off a faint glow. Its appearance had changed significantly. A gold band inlaid with glittering amber flecks, its color a deeper, more vibrant golden yellow, tinged with orange. With gold as its form and amber as the viz carrier, the ring now had a protective function. Li Wei slipped the ring on and felt warmth spread from it. As the ring drew on the viz stored in his staff, faint golden runes crawled out over the metal and slid across his skin, forming a transparent magic shield. After a moment, the pale shield faded from sight. It would only reappear when the wearer was attacked. Rune shield +5. The ring provided 5 points of shield, 5 points of damage it could absorb. Once broken, it would need to draw vis from his staff to recover. Without hesitation, he made another rune ring, then a pendant and a belt. 2 rings, 1 necklace, 1 belt. That was the maximum number of accessories that could be effective at once. Even if he wore more, only these 4 would function. Together, they provided a total of 28 points of shield. After finishing the 4-piece rune set, Li Wei upgraded them and added special effects. When the belt's shield broke, it released a shockwave to push nearby enemies away. The ring's broken shields granted him a health regeneration effect, and if the necklace's shield failed, it immediately generated another temporary rune shield worth 8 points. Now he felt confident facing a ringwraith siege. Their curses, mental assaults, magical damage, and various martial techniques were no longer insurmountable. They were still dangerous, but not like before, when he had no countermeasures and could only rely on brute force. Li Wei caught his breath, put away his tools, and packed his backpack. Research in the tower was exhausting, mainly because it drained the mind. He could hardly imagine Saruman staying holed up in his tower for decades just to tinker out a magical ring. Of course, the ring Saruman sought was not what Li Wei had made. Saruman wanted a ring of power on the scale of the 3 elven rings. If he saw Li Wei's ring, he might find it curious, but he wouldn't think it the same thing. Li Wei's ring had only one practical function: magic defense. The sun was high as Li Wei stepped down from the tall tower and headed toward the gate of Roadside Fort. The gatekeepers quickly opened the city gate to welcome him back. The residents had grown used to his sudden absences and returns. They were usually glad to see their lord come home. Today, though, there was one exception: the cook who'd been in charge of Little Pink's meals. While Li Wei had been immersed in research, he'd occasionally been so busy distilling viz or adjusting magic conduits that he forgot to feed Little Pink twice. He then entrusted the care of Little Pink to a resident with high contribution points. As soon as that resident heard Li Wei had returned, he hurried over, head bowed, and said, "My lord, I've come to confess." "What's wrong?" Li Wei asked, a bad feeling settling in. "It's Little Pink, whom you entrusted to me to care for. What happened to it? Did something happen?" "No, nothing bad. I can't explain it properly, my lord, but I swear I didn't skimp on Little Pink's food. I always let it eat as much as it wanted, whatever it liked, until it couldn't eat anymore. We got on well. It was very close to me, but it's just..." As the man stammered, a small figure came running from a distance, flapping tiny wings and waddling on its hind legs. Plop, it crashed into Li Wei's leg and rubbed against him energetically. "Good boy, good boy." Li Wei stroked the creature's head. Judging by its round belly, it had been well fed, and its spirits were high, very content. "Isn't this great?" he said, looking at the cook. "Why the confession, then?" The cook hurried to explain. "It's my fault, my lord. Please punish me. I didn't watch Little Pink properly, and it ran off to play with a dahuang next door." At that moment, a dahuang came bounding up. Little Pink let go of Li Wei's pant leg and began frolicking with the newcomer. Li Wei laughed. "All right, it's fine. Don't worry. Let it play. There aren't many of its kind here to teach it social behavior. Besides, it's not even half a year old yet. It really needs a playmate." Li Wei felt a little weary as he comforted the trembling cook and sent him back to his duties. After a while, the two had run themselves out. One dragon and one dog came to Li Wei and sat in front of him. He reached out with both hands, one stroking the dragon's head and the other the dog's, and took a closer look at the playmate. It was a well-trained Dahuang, steady, obedient, intelligent, and good-tempered, friendly rather than fierce. It clearly knew whom to be aggressive with and whom to leave alone. Its owner must have trained it well. The dog looked a bit old, though. Li Wei fed the Dahuang a piece of meat, rubbed Little Pink's dragon-like head, and sighed softly. "Why do you have to play with that?" he murmured. "You can live so long." Like elves, dragons had no fixed lifespan. They endured. Chapter 135. Moria Li Wei hesitated. Letting a newborn dragon, one that hadn't yet seen the world, feel separation this early might be cruel. Dragons lived for ages, and partings would come often enough in their long lives, but the hatchling was still so young. Still, some things couldn't be postponed forever. He released Little Pink and let the little dragon continue to playing while he returned to the castle, spread a map on the table, and planned his next destination, Lothlorien. With a destination came a route. He drew a line from Roadside Fort to Moria. Not far from Moria's eastern exit was that golden forest. The two places were almost adjacent. Looking at them, Li Wei felt a twinge of emotion. Dwarves and elves had once shared a true friendship. The dwarves had aided the elves with enthusiasm, but their growing greed and stubbornness had brought them harm in the end. The rings given to the dwarves by Sauron had stoked covetousness in them like fire, making them jealously guard their treasures, yet their stubbornness kept them from being wholly corrupted or controlled. After obtaining a ring, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, led by King Durin III, sent a great host to aid the elves against Sauron. It was with their help that Elrond had been able to withdraw in safety. That debt explained Elrond's tolerance toward Thorin and his kin in Rivendell. Gratitude to ancestors ran deep. Sauron, furious at the partial defeat, set the orcs to make everlasting enemies of the dwarves. From then on, the two races met in battle whenever they crossed paths, their enmity burning deeper than most. "All right, I'll go from here," Li Wei decided. That autumn, he left Roadside Fort, heading south. He crossed the Loudwater, went down into Eregion, past broken ruins, and came to the lake beneath the misty mountains, the site of Moria's west gate. Under the night sky, he looked at his reflection on the water and touched the edge. The ripples spread, stirring whatever lay beneath, but when they faded, the lake was perfectly still. "Hey, is anyone there?" he called, and tossed a stone into the water. No monstrous tentacles emerged. He had been trying to rouse the nameless watcher in the water, but it didn't answer. Instead, a sound came from the mountain, a roar as a warg clambered up, its ugly head and blood-red eyes fixed on the human below. This place was called Moria now, not Khazad-dûm. The name itself marked it as a place of darkness, crawling with orcs, wargs, ogres, and other beasts. Wargs, only one? Li Wei thought, and then another wolf appeared beside the first. Moments later, countless red lights blinked across the ridge. A pack. Li Wei licked his lips and drew his longsword. Under the moon, the blade flashed, a cold light that in the wolf's eyes might as well have been noxious thorns. When Li Wei stepped forward and let the moon outline his figure, the leading warg yelped and bolted downhill. The rest, startled, followed without a backward glance. The hillside fell quiet again. He sheathed his sword and turned to where he had come to find the gate. Next to the deep lake, a vertical slab of rock rose smoothly, like it had been cut or carved. As he approached, symbols glimmered along the face of the stone. It was a hard, enchanted gate. Dwarven and Elven worked together, so powerful that even Sauron's forces at their height had been held at bay outside. It needed a word to open. "Melon," Li Wei said, "friend," in Elvish. The rune-lit door opened with a rush. That a dwarven entrance needed an Elvish word to unlock it told of the friendship that once existed between the races. When Eregion stood, the gate had been kept wide. Now, however, it being closed was a mercy. Once shut, the only light vanished, and the passage fell into pitch black. He didn't bother with a torch. Li Wei drank a night vision potion. The darkness peeled away. Two massive stone pillars rose dozens of meters inside, guarding a wide passage that led deeper. Small doors flanked the pillars. One of those doors creaked open. Inside was a modest room, straw beds near a cold fireplace, empty weapon racks on the wall, a small table with dusty plates and wine glasses. "Outpost," he muttered. No one had been here for a long time. The place was useless since the fall. He checked both outposts and rifled through chests and racks, hoping to find something worthwhile, old habits of a player looting ruins. Finding nothing of value, he closed the doors and walked into the wide passage between the pillars. A treacherous narrow path clung to the cliff with a bottomless chasm yawning beneath. In the depths something moved, an orc perhaps, but it didn't notice him. The path forked in three, an upper, middle, and lower route. The top way led toward a dwarven-style passage, the other two dropped into unknown darkness. Li Wei chose the upper path without hesitation. It proved the right move. A grand hall opened before him. Classic dwarven architecture, tall and wide, held up by many stone columns. A stairway with a low ceiling led upward, creating the illusion giants might have once lived here. All was silent. He walked for a long time. His night vision potions ran out, so he pulled an alchemy set and materials from his ender chest and brewed more on the spot. The march through Moria stretched for days, its corridors filled with misleading turns and dead ends. He kept finding unknown rooms, backtracking and getting lost. The rumor had been true. Moria was a labyrinth. After several days wandering and getting turned around again and again, impatience won. Li Wei set his pickaxe in his hands. "Forgive me, Thorin," he said to the old steward's memory. "This place of yours is too hard to navigate. I'll help renovate it a bit." Clink. Another stone came loose from the wall. After helping his companions clear and renovate the passages of Moria, Li Wei finally found a relatively wide corridor that looked like it led toward the eastern exit. He swallowed another night vision potion and descended the stairs. As he climbed down, he glanced up. His eyes widened and his breathing slowed. The chamber was enormous, so vast that he couldn't see the far end. Countless monumental stone pillars, hundreds of feet tall, rose from floor to roof, supporting this underground kingdom. Each pillar was intricately carved in dwarven style, an awe-inspiring sight. This was Khazad-dûm, Moria, a wonder of Middle-earth, a magnificent subterranean hall. But soon there would be new wonders to see beyond it. Li Wei walked slowly through that endless hall. Silence pressed in on him, and after a while, he began to lose his sense of direction. After an indeterminate number of potions and turns, he finally noticed a different outline on the eastern side, a door, a large metal-framed door. Excited, he ran to it and tried to push. The door didn't open, it only vibrated slightly, clearly blocked from the other side. It was built too solidly to break down by ordinary force. Li Wei was not ordinary. He drew his axe and smashed the door in. Clatter. As he stepped through, his foot hit something brittle and scraped across the floor with a soft sound. He crouched. It was the skeleton of a dwarf, so decomposed that only fragile bones remained. The bones crumbled at the slightest touch. The dwarf still wore armor. Li Wei moved the remains aside and continued to search the room. A wooden chest creaked open, dust sliding off in a thick curtain, but the contents gleamed as if newly made. "Gold, silver," he muttered. Another chest revealed a heap of jewelry and ornaments. There were many such chests, enough treasure to satisfy a person, even a family, for generations. Most people would have spent a long time rejoicing over such loot. Li Wei felt only slight boredom. Gold and silver were meaningless to him. If he wanted, he could flood roadside fort with his wealth. His backpack had very few empty slots anyway, and carrying gold felt like wasting space. He opened a few more chests out of habit, glanced at the contents, and closed them without hesitation. At the far side of the room, something on a smithing table caught his eye, several silver-white pieces stacked and covered in dust. He wiped them clean, and an item ID appeared in his status bar. Mithril, the finest, rarest metal of the world, whiter than silver, harder than gold, and more brilliant than diamonds. The item bar added recipes: mithril chainmail, mithril leggings, mithril boots, mithril circlet. The 4-piece mithril set rivaled netherite alloy in stats, slightly stronger than diamond armor, but lacking knockback resistance. Still, overall, netherite alloy is a bit better, Li Wei thought. Mithril could also be forged into swords with 9 base damage, the same as Nemesis. Its reputation was justified. There were exactly 4 pieces on the table, enough for a mithril chainmail, worth more than everything else in the room combined. Once, when mithril was still being produced, it exchanged for gold at 1 to 10. After the fall of Moria, mithril became unobtainable and priceless. After stowing the precious pieces safely, Li Wei searched the rest of the room. Finding nothing of greater value, he set the door back in place to leave. Just as his foot crossed the threshold, something on the dwarf's ribcage caught his eye. An object lodged in the sternum. Because of the angle, he hadn't seen it when he moved the body earlier. "May your soul rest in peace," Li Wei whispered, then reached in and pulled it free. It was a small, silver-white axe, finely crafted and sturdy, with unfamiliar runes etched into the head. He had never seen such symbols before, but the workmanship was exceptional. He decided to take it to Thorin. Perhaps the dwarf king would recognize it. Li Wei closed the door, reinforced the latch, and frowned. Clang! An arrow struck his breastplate and glanced off to the side. Roar! A harsh cry echoed from between the stone pillars. Li Wei looked toward the sound and saw an orc staked out on a pillar, its face grotesque with lumps that blurred its features, staring at him like an unfamiliar intruder. Upon receiving a gift, one should reply in kind. Li Wei notched an arrow and loosed it at the orc. The orc twisted aside at the last second, but the arrow still grazed it. For most shooters, a graze would be insignificant, but not for Li Wei. His arrows were never merely touched. The arrow burst into flame where it nicked the orc. The creature screamed and frantically rubbed itself against the pillar, trying to extinguish the fire, but to no avail. It fell from the pillar like a burned, brittle twig, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The flash and the sound drew every eye in the hall. "I think this place would be perfect for a concert," Li Wei commented dryly. Boom! A drumbeat answered from the depths, boom, boom, like a giant heartbeat, growing louder and closer. He stepped forward to look. At the far end of the hall, a mass of shapes writhed and poured out, filling the space like ants. Swarming across the floor, clambering up pillars where they could, hanging from the dome if there was nowhere else to go. Those dangling from the roof had to have tremendous arm strength, otherwise they would have long since fallen to their deaths. Orcs, an orc army from deep within Moria, a ferocious nether legion. "All right, the audience has arrived," Li Wei murmured. In the gloom, their red eyes fixed on the intruder. Just as they prepared to surge forward and tear him apart like a swarm of locusts, Li Wei called out, deliberately loud and polite. "Wait a moment. Please, wait." For some reason, the orcs froze. They stopped, as if compelled, standing still and waiting for him to continue. "You may not know me," he said. "We haven't met, and this place doesn't seem like it gets much news from the outside world. But I promise, everyone will know me very soon, because you will scatter like cowardly dogs whose master is dead." The hateful voice rolled through the hall, echoing from end to end, lingering and full of menace. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Something dark and terrible seemed to be stirring in the shadows, growing more fierce, like Mount Doom about to erupt. Chapter 137, and fear remained in the heart. Anger swelled in every orc until it reached a breaking point. Roar! In an instant, like a breached dam, the OK army from the nether surged forward, a tidal wave of fury sweeping toward the lone human. No one could stand such an insult, least of all the hot-tempered, bloodthirsty orcs. They bellowed, shrieked, and struck at the air with crude weapons like overexcited children, venting the storm in their chests. Their armor was ugly, dark, and spiked. Their weapons dripped with venom and rust. Their faces were feral and hungry. It was a sight that made the pulse quicken. Nice momentum, Li Wei thought. He wasn't one to back down. He bit into a golden apple, drained a row of potions, and drew his longsword. In the cavernous, torch-lit hall, he charged alone at the oncoming horde. Their armor seemed to swallow the light, but his blade flashed blindingly bright. For a beat the orcs faltered, sober under the sudden brilliance. But the moment was gone. The black-armored humans smashed into them. Crash. Several orcs, ignited and launched like ragdolls, flew backward. Some tumbled into their own ranks. Others slammed into the hall's stone pillars and crumpled. They streaked through the dimness like shooting stars, briefly lighting up the faces of their comrades. Li Wei planted himself like a boulder in a rapids, and the surging tide of bodies parted and spilled around him. "Get out of the way!" a rough voice barked from behind the orcs. An ogre with a huge spiked iron ball chained to its wrist lumbered forward. The swing cleaved a path. Spikes nicked a few orcs, and they went down, turning into instant meat for those behind them. The iron ball rose, filling Li Wei's view. Boom! Dust exploded up. For a heartbeat, the noisy roar of the orcs fell away, and there was only the heavy, grinding swing. The ball smashed down as if to flatten the human and his sword into one hard, motionless lump. Then a golden light flared beneath the iron ball. The two rings on Lewi's fingers glowed. Runes danced across his skin. With a roar of energy, he braced and turned the iron ball aside. "The rings!" Someone at the back cried out. The orc chieftain, calm, collected compared to the rest, bared his teeth in sudden interest. "The master will like this." "Kill him! Chop off his fingers!" Another voice shrieked. The ogre swung again. Liwei leveled his longsword to meet the blow. Clang! Steel met metal. The force shoved him back a step, but he held. Then he surged forward, cleaving through the nearest orcs. His sword tip dropped and then flicked upward in a precise arc. The ogre's bulk shifted weirdly. Its entire body was lifted as if struck by a hidden lever. Liwei followed with a jump and a downward slash that sliced through hide and ignited thick, bristling flesh. The impact toppled a clutch of orcs nearby, leaving them winded and useless. The burning ogre could only wildly swing its club. Liwei landed, lobbed an ender pearl into the air, and it snapped to a stone pillar. With shimmering purple motes, he blinked and planted a block on the pillar, finding footing high above the melee. Orcs tracked the falling particles and began to scramble up the pillars or notch arrows toward his perch. He didn't pause. Arrows thunked into his armor. 7, 8, none forced him back. One particularly long-range shot came from a dead-still orc amid the chaos. That orc's composure stood out like a calm eye in a storm. Liwei locked onto him. "Found you," he muttered. Red blocks, TNT, popped free and tumbled near the calm orc, glittering along their seams. As the orc's attention snapped to the bright danger, Liwei threw another ender pearl toward the orc chieftain's position. Boom! The ground erupted underfoot, carving a pit and blowing shards from a pillar. Before the second set of explosives detonated, purple lights drifted down, and Liwei blinked into a distant heap of orcs, stomping an orc's head to steady himself and hurling yet another pearl. Explosions detonated in dense succession, throwing orcs into disarray and drawing every eye, including the chieftains. "Everyone, fall back! Let the ogres take the front," he barked, trying to reorganize, but when he squinted up at the shattered pillar, he saw nothing. The figure had vanished. "Where?" His voice cracked with sudden alarm. A burning orc came flying from behind and landed at his feet. "Here!" it cried. The chieftain whirled and slashed. A golden glow flared, rune shield, but it barely mattered. The longsword came through anyway. Fire erupted from the chieftain's body as the blade drove into his chest. Then, with a clean, unnatural slice, the head separated from the shoulders and tumbled free. The headless body sagged to the stone. Liwei, torch in hand, grabbed the severed head and held it high. "You scum! Look who this is," he shouted, letting his voice roll across the battlefield like a slap. He should have known how effective that tactic was. Charge into the ranks, demonstrate power, seek out the chieftain, behead him, and watch the army's courage crumble. It had worked many times before, but this time he misread the moment. Roar! An ogre's club crashed down where Liwei had just stood. He leapt aside in time to avoid the blow, but the impact crushed the armor on the headless corpse and sent a shock through the spot he'd occupied. An unpleasant reminder that the enemy still had reach. The ogre's strike was followed by the rushing, hateful surge of the rest of the Aoke army. They realized their target had slipped among them, and they swarmed, shrieking, closing ranks with murderous intent. No one in the crowd paused to mourn their fallen chieftain. Their focus was a single living human in black armor, torchlight dancing on a blade and on a severed head held high, a provocation that would not and could not go unanswered. Chapter 138, Balrog. In that instant, Liwei understood. The orc chieftain they'd just killed was no true leader, only a commander. He could give orders to those orcs, marshal the Aoke army, but he did not represent them. Liwei watched an orc step over the corpse, drool, dig into the shattered armor, pull out a few strips of ragged meat and swallow them, then turn its feral gaze toward the nearest enemy. There was no discipline in that look. Compared with the orcs of the Misty Mountains, this Nether Legion was more chaotic and feral. Their once powerful leader was gone, Azog had fallen, and after Azog and Bolg were beheaded by Liwei, Moria no longer had a chieftain capable of unifying the orcs. The leader they'd just slain had likely been sent by Sauron as a temporary commander. Until a truly dominant chieftain rose, their real allegiance was to Sauron alone. A vast, dark will pressed down on every orc, forcing them into submission. As long as the source of that will remained, they could regroup again and again. Killing a temporary leader would not shatter them. So be it. If that was the case, Leeway thought, he would make them feel it. He had come to kill until they acknowledged him. Let's see which is stronger, the fear Sauron planted in you, or the slaughter you're feeling now. A sweeping arc of force sent dozens of orcs flying like a rain of embers. They crashed down, raising a choking cloud of dust. Charred chunks of flesh rained from above, striking unlucky orcs only to be torn apart and devoured by their kin. The ogres swung their massive weapons, smashing again and again. Some blows were stopped by crude shields, others deflected by flashes of golden light, many thudded into the floor. The war drums beat on. From the pits came giant beasts, their bulk pressing the air. Together with the ogre's encirclement, even Li Wei was forced back for a moment. Explosions of red TNT scarred the stone and sent limbs flying. Then lava sluiced down the carved pillars, burning throats and hide. Monsters howled and staggered. The din in the hall went on, echoing through dome and stone, traveling deeper and deeper into the earth until in the darkest pit, something stirred. A pair of scarlet burning eyes flared. The heat sweeping up from below made Li Wei instinctively draw back the lava he had summoned. He felt something unfamiliar and electric, a mixture of fear and exhilaration he hadn't felt since ages past. Even smog had not touched him like this. It was intoxicating. At that signal, the fighting faltered. The ogres and the pit beasts were the first to flee. They sensed a predator above them, one not merely stronger in combat, but superior in all ways: physique, presence, even spirit. Seeing them break and run confirmed the worst for the orcs. It was time to get out. They poured back the way they had come, like a receding tide. Li Wei didn't bother with them. He turned his back on the Aokei army and walked toward the source of the heat. He came to a vast, bottomless pit. A current of heat rushed up like the breath from a furnace. To an unknowing observer, it might have seemed there was an enormous underground lava lake below. But this was something else. Li Wei swallowed a fire resistance potion and felt the burn of anticipation. A pair of glowing red eyes opened in the depths, and a volcano of a shape rose. Caught off guard, Li Wei only had time to leap aside and onto a long stone stair. The air vibrated with a colossal blow. For a moment his stomach dropped, his vision tilted, and he felt himself pitching backward. He saw flying shards of stone, and then, with a sickening crunch, the massive pillar holding the stairs shattered like tofu. The pillar and the steps crumbled, and he began to fall with them. From the abyss unfurled shadow and flame. A charred, hulking figure ignited by the pit's heat rose up. Two wings, wide enough to blot out the chasm, spread open. It was Durin's clan's ancient enemy, the Balrog. A thunderous roar rolled through the cavern. The Balrog's hide glowed like burning coal, its body a furnace of crimson light. It drew its hand inward, and flames coalesced into a towering, burning longsword. With a motion like splitting the air itself, the Balrog brought that blade down toward the falling Li Wei. In midair, Li Wei bit into a golden apple, drew his sword, and lifted his shield. The impact exploded in a blinding flash. His shield shattered into fragments. The rune belt around his waist flared, triggering its emergency defense and throwing him clear of the Balrog's swing with a concussive force. For a dizzying heartbeat, he saw everything fragment. One instant, the stone wall, the next, the Balrog's red, hulking form and the distortion of the air around it, and then only a scatter of stones whirling past. He was thrown free, slamming through the air among the rubble. When he finally came to, half suspended on a broken ledge, he realized what had just happened. That single strike had demolished all his rune shields and wrecked the durability of his physical shield. Terrifying, truly terrifying. He gulped for breath. A fallen, corrupted Maya, a creature on the same spiritual level as Sauron, this Balrog. That single blow, he thought, could have cleaved even Sauron in two. Chapter 139, Justice Sneak Attack. A scorching heat assaulted him from below, searing through his armor and warming his back. An emergency rune shield shimmered weakly around him, bracing for impact. A longsword of living flame struck out, Li Wei tossed an ender pearl and teleported to the wall. The heat wave scattered the lingering purple particles. The Balrog clung to the rock face, scanning left and right. Below, a figure was running while placing blocks beneath his feet, building a stone path in seconds, trying to climb. Heh heh, came a mocking laugh. The flaming longsword dissolved and was replaced by a searing, crackling whip. The whip snapped through the air and, as if with a will of its own, coiled downward. One of Li Wei's feet suddenly sank. In the next instant, his whole body was flung uncontrollably, slamming against the cliff, tumbling and grinding over sharp rock. Whoosh! His figure vanished, turning to a spray of purple particles. Then Li Wei reappeared above the Balrog's head. He laid down a few blocks and poured several buckets of water over the edge. A long sheet of water streamed down, hissing as it struck the Balrog, sending up clouds of steam, but it couldn't hide the orange-red glow of his approaching eyes. Boom! The blocks underfoot shattered. Those few squares of water were laughable before the Balrog's bulk, instantly vaporized. His flames showed no sign of dimming. With a roar, they flared even higher. Li Wei lost his footing again and began to fall. For the Balrog, the makeshift one-block path was laughably thin, too narrow even to grasp. A casual squeeze would reduce it to dust. Clang! Li Wei drew Nemesis and met the Balrog head-on. The sword flared with an unnatural light. The impact split them apart, one sent upward, the other downward. The knockback enchantment finally revealed its true purpose, every swing feeling like a heavy hammer blow, boosting his striking power. That gave Li Wei a chance, or so he thought. He stared at the blade in surprise. This wasn't only knockback, there were other properties the system hadn't identified. After using the sword so long, he knew the feel of every enchantment. The Balrog charged, roaring, and conjured a flaming longsword. Li Wei met him without hesitation, swinging with everything he had. Buzz! A piercing clash rang out. The force made Li Wei's arm go numb. Even a vibration-dampening weapon could not negate the recoil. His hand slipped backward as he parried the Balrog's flaming blade. This time, the blow was even. Ordinary steel would have melted against the Balrog's heat, but not swords bound with older power. Nemesis hummed with a cold light. At that moment, Li Wei understood. It was an elven blessing from the First Age. One of the Balrog's names was Nemesis of the Elves, because it had slaughtered so many of them, yet the elves had refused to yield and fought on. For the first time, surprise crossed the Balrog's face. Which lord seeks vengeance? He had slept for over 6,000 years. These tiny creatures were still so persistent. For millennia, Durin's nemesis had lain in Moria and knew nothing of the world beyond. In his mind, the surface might still be full of elf lords in glory. No need. I don't need to be remembered by a craven survivor, Li Wei shouted, gripping a protruding rock and looking down. The Balrog laughed. His flames shifted from orange-yellow to deep red, then toward white. Thick smoke billowed from his wings, carrying waves of heat. Li Wei felt a strange déjà vu, as if he were smoked meat. Moria pit barbecue, slow-roasted over the Balrog's fire. If only Gandalf were here now. He tossed ender pearls one after another, teleporting across the cliff face like someone running on vertical ground, dodging the Balrog's relentless attacks. The Balrog spread his wings and followed, flying through the ravine. Everything in his wake was scorched black. Anything in his path was smashed flat. His momentum was brutal. Gandalf's victory over the Balrog hadn't been due only to Glamdring or a handful of spells. He bore Narya, the Ring of Fire, one of the 3 elven rings. It carried authority over flame, enough to shape light and suppress a Balrog to some degree. A sudden gust grabbed Li Wei's attention. Orange-white fire burst out and engulfed him. Even the fiercest flames couldn't burn him now. The fire resistance potion made him feel only the presence of heat, not its harm. But the Balrog's attacks were more than heat. A massive metallic strike rang out. The rune shield shattered with a boom. The Balrog's fist, bigger than an ogre, slammed him. Li Wei flashed in an afterimage, tumbling and flying out of the chasm. His armor's durability took a hit for the first time in a while. His health dropped sharply, and then began to regenerate. "Are you stir-frying something?" The status bar flashed, giving him a brief nausea debuff for 2 seconds. Seizing the airborne moment to escape, Li Wei tossed an ender pearl, slipped through a huge door, and burst out of the ravine into the Hall of Miracles. He landed and gulped cold, clean air like a man reborn. Whoa! The chill was a balm, but it didn't last. The Balrog's heat pursued. Leeway bit into a golden apple, and a faint gold aura blinked across his skin. Amber runes spread from within his ring, flowing across his body. The viz stored in his staff drained as it recharged the rune shield. This was the most humiliating fight he'd ever been in. He hadn't even seen the Balrog's health bar. He ground his teeth. A tremor ran through the floor, something huge clambering up the ravine wall. Can I endure this humiliation? He asked himself. He sprinted to the doorway and planted rows of TNT along the frame, above and below, then crouched to the side, waiting. The trembling grew into a thunderous approach. Boom! The Balrog couldn't fit through politely, so he crashed the doorway, shattering the frame and the wall into jagged rubble. As the gap yawned open, a massive foot stepped in. Now! Leeway shouted, drawing Nemesis and bringing it down with everything he had. Clang roar. The Balrog drew back a toe sharply. Durin's Nemesis, Balrog, 9000. Chapter 140. So he turned and walked into the mountains. Compared to dragons, Balrogs were undoubtedly a bit smaller. That didn't make them any less powerful, though. Their vitality and ferocity surpassed ordinary dragons. 2 ages ago, when dragons still ruled the skies, many of those winged beasts served as mounts for Balrogs, carrying them over towering city walls so the Balrogs could storm into cities and wreak havoc. Before Morgoth bred flying dragons, the elves had never imagined they'd have to defend against attacks from the air, and they paid dearly for that oversight. In the Great Hall, just before the shattered opening, Leeway glanced at the Balrog's health bar and felt a flash of surprise. It read, +1/+1. Almost instantly, the tiny damage from his sneak attack was completely restored as the flames crawling over the Balrog's body flickered. Its life recovery rate was nearly on par with Leeway's own. Another boss with a special mechanic. Leeway felt helpless. Fire resistance potions could only grant immunity to fire, but they couldn't suppress the flames the way the Ring of Fire did. As for water, unless it was on the scale of a river or a lake, it probably wouldn't do anything to a Balrog, not even dim its flames. Unfortunately, conjuring a lake wasn't an option right now. More fundamentally, water's ability to counter Balrogs came from the divine power of Ulmo, Lord of Oceans and Waters, that pervaded all water in this world. All water inherently carried a purifying effect capable of suppressing dark and evil things. That was also why orcs could only drink filthy water from birth to death. Clean water harmed them instead. Whoosh! Leeway's sneak attack had clearly enraged the Balrog. It grabbed a chunk of rubble and hurled it at him, but Leeway had already tossed an ender pearl and teleported away. The Balrog wouldn't stand idly by while its prey escaped. It shoved aside the shattered door fragments it had smashed through, bent down, and stepped into the Great Hall. Screech. The piles of TNT that Leeway had placed on either side earlier caught the Balrog's flames. They ignited, glowing and belching black smoke. The Balrog hesitated for the first time. Boom. Successive explosions tore out one crater after another. TNT debris flew everywhere and detonated around the Balrog. A flash of white light and the smell of gunpowder lit up the hall, blowing the remaining wall apart. The newly created opening was now the perfect size for the Balrog's body to pass through. Leeway stopped and looked back. Thump! Stone debris was casually swatted into the air. The Balrog climbed out of the ruins with a roar, its surrounding flames undiminished. Pathetic insect, trying to fight me with explosives and fire. Leeway could read the mockery on that demonic face. He had, by chance, made things worse. Explosions and fire were the Balrog's domain. He unconsciously pulled out his magnifying glass and scanned the approaching behemoth step by step. Fire, chaos, void, hunger, energy, darkness, soul, and immortality, wrath, arrogance. A new Viz element appeared, forbidden. As the massive fiery form loomed before him, raising a flaming longsword, Leeway swung Nemesis again to meet it. Rumble. White light flashed where the blades met, forcing both back, yet neither yielded. They struck again and again, sword against sword. Thump! Leeway was shoved backward, a long gouge scoring the floor. Netherite alloy's knockback resistance was suddenly inadequate. It could deflect flying arrows, withstand an ogre's heavy punches, even resist the strikes of giant beasts. But a Balrog? That was a fallen Maya, a being of legendary power. Thump! The long swords met again. The rune shield around Li Wei dimmed bit by bit, trying to absorb the Balrog's impact. Under the enhancement of basic swordsmanship, each strike Li Wei landed increased the power of his next swing until it hit the enhancement cap. Beyond basic swordsmanship, some mysterious force was also aiding him. Every clash sent a pure white light from his blade, protecting Nemesis from shattering. Elf, the Balrog sneered disdainfully. It clenched its other hand, and a long whip condensed from flame and shadow. Snap! The air warped where the whip cracked. The Balrog slammed its sword with the right hand and lashed the whip with the left. Taking advantage of Li Wei's recent block, it flicked the whip toward Nemesis. Trying to disarm me? This time, it was Li Wei's turn to be contemptuous. Swordsmanship, parry. The whip was unnaturally knocked back. Li Wei didn't stop there. He reached out and grabbed the end of the flaming whip, yanking it sharply toward him. Thump! The whip straightened. For a moment, the Balrog couldn't maintain its grip on the weapon. It slid a fraction toward the human. What monstrous strength! Both of them thought at once. Li Wei hadn't grabbed the whip by accident. It was the combo effect of parry, disarm. After activating the swordsmanship skill, if the opponent held a droppable weapon, Li Wei had a chance to find a weak point and knock the weapon free. But the Balrog's strength still completely overpowered him. Even if a weak point was found, dropping the weapon would be extremely difficult. The Balrog finally regarded the fight seriously. All of you, get out here and kill him. The orcs hiding in the shadows froze. A deep, ancestral fear stirred in their veins. Since ancient times, Balrogs had been natural generals in the forces of evil, the highest commanders on the battlefield. They answered only to Morgoth. Any other legion would yield to them, even dragons. Orcs, bred as cannon fodder by Morgoth, ranked lower than most other troop types. The dread embedded in their blood was awakened. The dark will that had been oppressing their minds held for a moment, then withered. With a single command, the Balrog usurped Sauron's control over them. It liberated them from that oppressive dark consciousness and took its place as their master. The creatures in the shadows opened their eyes, brutality and hunger filling their gazes. Fear and primal urges drove them. After so long, even orcs could sense that this opponent was a figure comparable to a Balrog, not someone they should face. Still, orders had to be obeyed. Clatter! The orcs surged forward and swarmed around Li Wei in layered ranks. Li Wei glanced at the Auke army, which had regrouped and returned to the battlefield, then looked at the Balrog one last time. Calmly, politely, he said, "Goodbye." Then he turned and walked toward the mountains. Thanks to Book Mountain Taoist for the 500 coin reward, thanks to Martian King for the 588 reading coin reward, and thanks to everyone who voted. Thank you for your support.